theme today is God, Justice, and Hope. Millions of humankind burned, crushed, mutilated, slaughtered. For what? For sleeping, for thinking, for sleeping the same night in the same city.
Yes, sir.
London, Dresden, Hiroshima. There could never have been so many who suffered more for less. And as we think of our own social locations, the communities out of which we come, we could say that as we paraphrase the words of Archibald MacLeish, that our communities are communities of pain and of suffering and of hurt. But today, a very able panel will discuss God, justice, and hope.
Over my head, I hear freedom in the air. Over my head, I hear freedom in the air. Over my head, I hear freedom in the air. There must be a God somewhere. I want us to make a commitment to wrestle a little bit today. Oftentimes on these panels we play nice. But I want us to wrestle a little bit because there's something at stake.
Yeah.
I used to work at a middle school in St. Louis, Missouri, and I never told the kids I was a preacher because I figured it was irrelevant and they were gang kids. They might rob me because they thought I had some money. And one of my toughest kids, Tyron, comes and tells me, that's T with an apostrophe, Y. R-O-N. He said, Tyron, say, Mr. Sekou, Johnny running around here lying on you. And I said, well, what is that? And we going to kick his. So I said, what are we going to do? I said, what is he saying? He says, you telling people, he run around telling people you're a preacher. I said, okay. I said, okay. I said, and he said, we know you ain't no preacher. Because you love us. You don't look down on us. You bring us cookies and you listen to us. You ain't no preacher, are you, Mr. Sekou? I said, I ain't no preacher. But that's a kind of indictment of the church. It's a fundamental critique of our failure to serve and care for young people. I'm going to get to the future, but I want to tell the truth about the moment that we're in. Bling bling is a ghetto-centric articulation of black middle-class values. We taught young people, get a big house, move out, stay away from this community. And so if they re-articulate it within the context of hip-hop culture, while we honor Bishop Simon McKenzie, it is a crime and an indictment of the AME church that it took 200 years for a woman to become the bishop. And so if they reproduce certain theological phenomena and certain sexist phenomena and homophobic phenomena, it is a reflection of the culture that they are in. Who are we called to be at this particular moment? Are we willing to wrestle with what the church fundamentally looks like? It might look like what Jay Baker, Tammy Faye Baker's son, does in a bar in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. They drinking Jack Daniels and he got a simple word, God loves you, and it's not your fault. And sometimes that's all we got to give young people. God loves you, and it's not your fault. So it's the question of what we wrestle with as a faith community in terms of who we are in the world and who God has called us to be. Then and only then can we sing Over My Head.
Yeah.
I work with gay youth in Philadelphia. I'm on the board of the Attic Youth Center, which serves queer youth in Philadelphia, ages 13 to 23, and all of my youth are on the outside of the church. So perhaps we can think a little bit about what that means in the context of our conversation today. From hip-hop culture to black youth, black males to black churches, more generally, everything is said to be in a state of crisis, where the health, the vitality, the stability, and more generally, everything that comes with the life of these things are at a crossroads. December 15, 2007, rapper Nas proclaimed that hip-hop was dead. Okay. February 24th, 2010, Eddie Glaude proclaimed that, in a piece written for the Huffington Post, he so rightfully proclaimed that the black church, as we know it or imagined it, that's a very important piece, is dead. Okay? Although I'm made anxious by narratives rooted in the manufactured rhetoric of crisis sensibilities, I'm persuaded that what these rhetorical pronouncements point towards and speak to is the reality of change across religious and cultural landscapes. So no, hip-hop is not dead. Black churches are not really dead. Black youth continue to thrive, and black males are obviously still among us. I am convinced that the practices and the performativities of black religious faith are increasingly becoming more diffuse, more complex, and therefore more difficult to understand solely from an institutional purview. So all of that to say that I'd like to suggest a rechanneling of the sometimes exaggerated anxieties that occupy our religious and theological imaginations towards a more forceful interrogation of the persistence and resilience and changing cartographies of religiosity as expressed in cultural production. The materiality of the body, rather than the arrested development of institution, provides both the question and the answer to queries of the impossible possibilities of justice and hope for the 21st century. After all, it's the materiality and the ontology of bodies that make up institutions themselves. Thank you.
The question that I asked this morning is, what will it take to break through ordinary patterns of living, to challenge the cultural pecking order that is unfair, oppressive, and unjust? What will it take to push past entrenched practices that hinder growth? What does it take to grow beyond personal limitations to reach our goals? What will it take to rise above dream dashers and hope snatchers, flamethrowers, haters, and intimidators, to remain focused on the future that is yet coming? What will it take to be innovative when everyone wants things to be the same? Let me say that again. What will it take to be innovative when everybody wants things to stay the same? What does it take to be creative without being misunderstood? And what will it take to strive for excellence when it is viewed as a threat? And what will it take to push for what other people consider an unpopular initiative? To get us off the sidelines, church, and onto the playing field, when doing so may disturb personal, professional, and institutional equilibrium around you, because they may be content on watching you watching the game instead of playing the game, because if you were really in the game, you would change the way the game is played. And so let me offer a suggestion. It's going to take three things: God, grace, and guts. When you find yourself in a position that you cannot get there by yourself, and you cannot point to anyone or any set of circumstances to explain why you're there, that's God. Yes, it is. When you have made mistakes, and all of us have made mistakes in the room, and neither your enemies nor your friends can use your mistakes against you, that's grace. And when fear has said its prayers and moved forward in spite of the obstacles, that's guts. Today, as my sister Dr. Carolyn Knight would say, we have the hymn book church versus the hip hop church versus the church of the hats and the white gloves to the dressed down church, the church of the Mercedes and the church of the hoopty and the church of no hoopty at all. And the church that's traditional versus contemporary, social gospel versus the personal gospel. The problem of inconsistency, that is the gap between what we preach and what we produce. Greatness requires walking your own path according to the word and the will of God. Stop carbon copy calling. Inviting those who oppose you into the conversation and preaching newness. Then perhaps we can have a church we can believe in. And the question always comes back then, who will lead the church we can believe in?
My name is Otis Moss Jr., and I agree with what has been said. I experienced a church that was a house of faith, a house of family, a house of freedom, a house of a prophetic pulpit, a house of integrity, a house of liberation, a house of deep, shouting, spiritual fervor. And there was a connection between that church and the historically black college and university. I raised the question, does such a church exist anymore? Should it? Can it be reclaimed? The black church must be global without being evangelistic. My wife and I traveled the end of last year and the beginning of this year to India. I was co-lecturer with Rajmohan Gandhi, grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. I traveled as a Christian, he traveled as a Hindu. But in terms of the presence of God in our journey, in our retreat, in our presentations, for we were talking about the impact of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. on the human rights movement in America and in India. But I couldn't tell where my Christianity ended and his Hinduism began. We were in such harmony. And they said something I shall not forget. They said, you know, on the night that President Obama was elected, we went to our temples, our mosques, and our churches, and we prayed. And when the announcement was made, we shouted and we cried. And I said, my, that's something. That's so different from Rush Limbaugh. We have to hear with global ears and respond with a universal heart. That's just one paragraph. We'll take up the rest in the next meeting. Thank you.